It took Hamas 5,000 rockets into Israel and massacring of 400 Jews on 7th of October to send the world into a frenzy. The Western democracies today are facing a diabolical threat of Islamic fundamentalism, which is of their own making. Unchecked, unabated immigration into Europe and United States of America has led to increased violence and terrorist attacks at the hands of Islamic fundamentalists. These radicals do not in any way represent the majority of the Muslim community, but they do take advantage of the ethos of the democracies that they represent: liberty, equality, and fraternity. And then they manipulate these freedoms to spread terror in the name of jihad. It is a complex question to find a solution to. How must the democracies of the world clamp down against Islamist fundamentalism without compromising on the very tenets on which they have thrived? It is also a moral dilemma for these democracies that they must be able to find an answer to. Now, will the bombing of the Palestinian women, children and innocents help in clamping down Islamist terrorism? And if killing of these babies, women and innocents in Palestine in retaliation to the Hamas barbarism against Israelis can be discounted as they had it coming, is there any difference left between the moderates and the extremists in the world? Let's start this conversation. Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor on the telecast with me. Ambassador Kapoor, you know, the world has continued to struggle and find an answer to how to curtail, contain terrorism, extremism, fundamentalism, and this time it is Islamist terrorism, Islamist fundamentalism, Islamist extremism.
Yes, thank you, Megha. The world is at an important tipping point. And I think it is very important for a large majority of the people in the world to sit together, for the country leaderships to come together and understand the serious threat it poses to the future of the world, to economic growth, to development, and see what is the path ahead now. For the Muslim countries also, it's extremely important because, as we have seen in the past, Muslim countries mostly refuse to take in Muslim refugees who have fled Muslim countries. Now, where have all these Muslim refugees gone? They have gone into the democracies, they have gone into the Western countries, they have gone into India in very large numbers, from Bangladesh, for example, tens of millions. Now, what happens to these countries as a result? So when the population of Muslims has increased in those countries, the demonstrations, the vote banks are created. The politicians have to sort of be more restrained in taking measures in the country's security requirements. So we are seeing a play out of all that already. And we have seen large-scale demonstrations, for example, in the Western world in favor of a terrorist organization, which is Hamas. And their charter calls for the elimination of Israel from the map of the world and killing of the Jews everywhere, not just in Israel. So if these sort of terrorist groups, which are clearly, what is surprising to me is that their agenda is not something which is kept away from the public eye. It is there written for the world to see. And still for the world to tolerate these sort of organizations, and for the Muslims to come out in demonstration and support in large numbers. Now, what is the silent majority of the Muslims doing all over the world is the first question. Why can't they speak up against those who are demonstrating in favor of a terrorist group? Why are people allowed to demonstrate in favor of terrorism? All these are very important questions because even for the Muslim countries, it's going to become a very serious internal security question in the days to come, as we have seen in Pakistan, because terrorism, is does not know any boundaries. It can turn against its own sponsor or supporter within no time and wreak havoc on its own, people or country which is supporting it.
Okay.
So even for the Muslim countries, it's a very, very serious threat. So I don't understand how they are allowing it to continue to flourish and to encourage it. And who is it benefiting ultimately?
Okay, yeah.
It's benefiting countries like Iran and China.
Absolutely.
And they are supporting it even more.
Absolutely. Zoita, again, how do we find a solution? Now, is the solution going to be to pull out all the Muslim immigrants who travel far and wide and find a home, a haven away from the extremism and fundamentalism they have been escaping from? Would it be right? It's also a moral question, because the fundamentalists, the extremists are only small and few in number, but they are then spreading Islamophobia as well. How can democracies, because we as democracies put ourselves on a higher pedestal, we say that we are not going to be acting like the fundamentalists. We have the onus of not just protecting our own, but protecting humanity.
Well, when you're looking at the protests that are happening, where are these protests happening? You know, you have to realize that these protests are not going on in the Arab world. Okay, these protests are not really happening in the Muslim world. So, you know, the Arabs do not like their lives to be disrupted or extremism to flourish so openly in their countries, even though there are lots of clerics in the Arab world who have been funding these Islamist movements around the world, but when it comes to their own countries, they do not want this riffraff to be kind of creating nuisance. So, where are these protests happening? The protests are happening primarily in the West, in London and in the US and, you know, countries like that, France, that is where the protests happening. But then, you know, largely this is happening, it is not about the Palestinian cause. You know, these people at the drop of a hat, at the very, you know, I mean, they are basically, I would say, an element or a problem with the law and order element. If you remember, I mean, a short time back, about say a few months back, Paris was literally burning. Where was the Palestinian cause at that time? So, the thing is that this is a problem that the West will have to tackle. They have allowed immigration to continue in an unabated manner. They have these groups who are kind of welcoming these immigrants into the country, saying, oh, you are oppressed. You know, this is exactly the pathway that they look for. Oh, we are oppressed in our countries and please accept us, and they are accepted because, you know, that there is this white man's burden, call it whatever it is. But the thing is that these people are accepted. I mean, exactly the pathway many people from India also go and seek asylum in Canada, for example, political asylum. So, that is what is going on. So, the Western countries, they have invited these people amongst themselves, and what is going on right now is would have happened sooner or later, irrespective of the Palestinian cause. That is what I
Yes,
see.
I mean, it's not a one-off incident. This has happened in the past as well. France has had to bear the brunt of it. America has had to bear the brunt of it. Europe has had to bear the brunt of it. Now, Gautam, it's interesting to note that these flare-ups, these terror threats, these stabbings of individuals who support the cause of Israel and Jews has happened primarily in the western part of Europe and in America. It has not touched Russia. It has perhaps not even touched the erstwhile Soviet countries. It's also an argument to pose that while in Arab nations any sort of dissent will be completely culled, because they themselves not representative of full democracies. There is also a political plank that will now be at play in Europe and America, because there has been politics that goes on with regards to immigration, where the right wing continue to support the cause of clamping down on it, while the liberals with their causes of, you know, talking about liberty and equality and freedom of expression, want immigration to take place on a large scale in these countries.
You've got two problems. One is a declining population. This is happening all over the West and Japan. And earlier, it was the Indians and the West Indians and, you know, basically peaceful immigrants who were let in, and it was a great success, at least from the Western point of view. There was a time in the 70s where Indians could go and study for free in Germany. They had to learn German. But I know a lot of Indian people who went and became engineers in Germany. The engineering education was excellent and it was free of charge. So that was one time. Later on, when they let in the Syrians and the likes, they found that things had changed. And there is a political agenda which is being used by a fringe element, and they are exerting undue leverage, disproportionate leverage. And in many cases, they've been given citizenship. And so these people are to a certain extent stuck, because if you give a terrorist, what turns out to be a terrorist, Swedish citizenship, now the fellow has privileges of one of the most liberal welfare states in the world. So this kind of thing. The other point, Megha, is the last time a battle of this type happened was in 1973. I'm talking of Palestine, Lebanon versus Israel. At that time, they didn't even agree to call Israel. They used to call it a Zionist state. And the charter of all these people, even today, is that they refuse to recognize its right to exist, and that is what this is about. Now, a lot has happened. There's a split between the moderates and the extremists, and the moderates are very willing to deal with Israel, and the extremists are not. So, in a way, you can look at this as evolution. And the days of extremism, whether it's in Africa and Sudan and Niger and so on, or whether it is in the Middle East itself, or even for that matter in the subcontinent, maybe we keep asking the question, what are the moderates doing? How come they're not speaking up? Well, they may not be speaking up, but they're not speaking for either.
Yeah.
At one time, in 1973, the idea was that the Arabs wanted the Israelis off the map. Today, in 2023, the Arabs find these Palestinians a nuisance. They find the extremists in the West a nuisance, because it isn't what the Arabs want to do. It isn't what the overwhelming bulk of Islam is interested in. They don't want to be the international pariah. They don't want to be looked on with suspicion. They don't want to be condemned. The business of the left and the right supporting things, that may go on, but terrorism per se is not the same thing, and nobody wants it.
Okay.
And I think what you're going to see is more and more tightening, both in the West and in the Arab lands. And, there will be no Palestine happening in terms of a state in any case. They turned it down twice, because they said there is no equivalence. If there is going to be Israel, there is not going to be a two-state solution. Well, they brought it upon themselves. Now they are not required by the Arabs. They're not required by the Europeans. They have created a situation that is, designed to end up, annihilating, if you like, radicalism.
Okay, all right.
50 years it took for them to mount this attack.
That's a view, but I would like to also put a
another 50 years.
contrasting view on the table. From the perspective of saying that the Palestinians brought it upon themselves, Vijay Kranti, to what the liberals are saying, when we take a look at speeches from Ilhan Omar or Alexandria Cortez, and even the kind of narratives that are being built on social media, television, news channels, and when we speak to people, I speak to certain people and they have contrasting views about what is happening in Israel and what is happening in Palestine. So, is this then how do we say that it is right for Israel to attack Palestinians, and in retribution to the number of innocents that were killed and maimed and butchered and raped, it is all right for Israel to then plant bombs and airstrikes on the churches and the hospitals, killing the same number, in fact more than the ones who were killed in Israel?
You know, one thing, right now you mentioned the attack on church and hospitals. Let us not forget, today the war is not between truth and falsehood. Today the war is of narrative. Let us not forget. And it is for those who can create narrative in every situation, they are considered to be the politically right. And there is acceptance for them and respect for them in spite of whatever reality is. In this particular case, there are good reasons to believe that the hospital in Gaza became a victim of a misfire by the Hamas terrorists. And there is no reason to believe that Israel is bent upon destroying churches, because Israel will be the last country to divert its attention from its real enemy, or become unnecessarily.
Israel has gone about cutting all water supply, food supply, electricity supply, fuel supply, and that is obviously choking the Gaza Strip. I mean, so much so that finally Egypt has come out, and now finally Israel allowing for Egypt to send out humanitarian aid and other essential supplies.
When you are at war, you are at war. It's for others to talk of human rights and...
No, but then, there is one thing that you call a war against a country. There is another to exterminate terrorists and terrorism. So when there is a surgical strike that India initiates into these targeted places, that's a surgical strike, and it's not war against Pakistan. Similarly, it's a strike, it's a terrorist attack that has taken place, and it's a retaliation that is coming in from Israel. But the Palestinians who are innocents, who are children, who are women, who are elderly, is this justifiable for them to be collateral damage?
Wonderful. You know, you have made my job very easy. I was going to discuss today, my focus is that the democratic world, Israel and others, today don't have to worry only about the Islamist jihad. They have to more now worry about the left liberalism, which is very fastly taking shape of a second communism, particularly in democratic world. You see today what is happening. Hamas has there are, as you also explained, that innocent Palestinians. Yes, Palestinian ordinary people are innocent, but the problem is that they are working as a shield for Hamas terrorists. So unfortunately, they also become a target. But my question is, what is happening today? The West has to now worry. The democratic world has now to worry not only the Islamist jihad. They have to worry more about their own people who are now playing the game of left liberals. Take New York Times, BBC, Washington Post, CNN. On a day, they might look like pro-Israel, but in reality, they are playing the game of the communists all over the world. They are condemning outright democratic governments. So right now, the world has to worry more about the communism, which is now taking a new shape of left liberalism.
Okay, and interesting. That's interesting.
Left liberal. This is. Let me conclude.
Yeah.
In one sentence, these left liberal, people who are now trying to divert the whole game from a terrorist attack to a humanitarian kind of campaign. So I think Israel should be the last and most foolish country if they stop and listen to those who are now asking that, okay, Hamas has hit you, very sad, but don't hit back, because now it will be anti-human.
Okay, absolutely.
This I don't think Israel should take.
Yeah.
It should be the last to take this.
Coming back to Pradeep Kapoor, Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor, it's also interesting to know which a number of these human rights organizations, people who are out on the streets, wanting to side with the Palestinians, talking about Islamophobia being spread by way of the attack that is being brought forth by Israel on Hamas and so on and so forth. The Biden administration has been really clear. US, UK, Canada, France, they've all been extremely clear on their agenda to support Israel. So when Biden goes back to his home and from the White House makes a statement, there is going to be all military support that is going to be provided to Israel in its fight against Hamas. There is $2.2 billion in military aid that is going to be provided to Israel. And at the same time, he talks about the humanitarian aid of about $1 billion, I think $50 million, which is being sent out to Gaza. So it's a balancing act that is being done by Biden, but not many in America are buying that. See, even in terms of the commentary that is coming in from certain political leaders, as well as those, you could call it BBC, you call it New York Times, there is an alternative view nonetheless.
So, as the previous panelist also mentioned, this is a game of narratives, and narratives will continue to be created. Now, also, if you have all these forces ranged on one side, which is the Islamists who are supported by the wokes, by the leftist Marxists, and getting funding from countries like China, your agenda is going to find some resonance amongst some part of the population. Now, it is posing a serious internal threat to a large number of countries. On the basis of humanitarian grounds, you are right when you say that. But if I ask you and ask the other panelists, what can be a motive for Israel to strike a hospital in the first place? If they're going to get only negative, sort of reaction all over the world, and it's not going to benefit them in any way in their own desired outcomes or what they're trying to achieve. So for this aspect now, for example, most of the Muslim world to still continue to propagate the lies that the bomb was fired from Israel and it was Israel bombing which destroyed that hospital, and not tell their people the fact that this is a misfired missile and this was fired by the Palestinian Islamic jihadis, and that would cool tempers down. Now, if that sort of propaganda continues, and on the other hand, Egypt has said categorically they will not take in a single Palestinian refugee. So has Jordan said the same thing.
Yeah.
So you are playing games which the people who do not want to see are not seeing. And it is very obvious that you're playing games all over the world. So that's why I'm saying that even if there is a silent Muslim majority who's not siding with them, and in their own world they're not allowing terrorism, now the demographic bomb which is ticking, because most of the populations of the non-Muslim demography is decreasing all over the world, even in India, very significantly. The Muslim population is increasing. So this is like a ticking time bomb for the world, and it's going to pose serious problems, as we have seen. Even in Palestine, you see, when they attacked Israel, the people who went across the border with all those deadly weapons and guns were mostly, children of the age of 15 to 20 to 25. It was not senior people who were fighting that war. It was just young kids who have been brainwashed in the madrasas from birth, and thereafter in the mosques and masjids.
Something, a tried and tested strategy that has also been seen in Kashmir for decades together. So that's the modus operandi that is used by these extremists, the Islamist jihadists. An example of it, very, very blatant, that was at play on October 7th. Jyoti Agran, a quick closing comment from you into the solution. Now, Israel is very focused in its agenda to snuff out Hamas. They have already demanded that the people living on the other side of Gaza, the Palestinians, need to be evacuated. Would then this result in first taking targeted attacks at Hamas, extinguishing it, exterminating it, and then finally coming to the table to have peace talks or a two-state solution?
Well, the thing is that until and unless, I mean, it's not easy to extinguish, Hamas, because they are very much there. And let's not forget one thing, before the rise of Hamas, Palestinian movement was not about Islam. Palestinian movement was about their homeland, but it was never about Islam. It is Hamas and like-minded terrorist groups. I would say from the middle of 2002, 3, 4 onwards, this element of Islamism came into it, and now it is there all over. So basically, this is more ISIS-like. So, and what happened, the way it was killed, the ISIS was kind of eliminated. I don't think, given Hamas's hold on the Palestinian people, or rather hold on Gaza, I don't think it's going to be easy for the Israelis to exterminate them.
Okay.
So I think right now what they need to do is that they need to basically talk to that Palestinian authority, I mean that Palestinian leader who is there in West Bank. So that is one way of going about it, because Gaza right now, the way it is, I don't think they are going anywhere until and unless. But I'll tell you something. Why was Israel complacent? Israel was complacent because they thought that Hamas now wants peace. And that was a major mistake that they made, that they thought, some kind of appeasement from within Israel was happening of Hamas. So at this moment, there is no peace, because even if Hamas talks of peace, behind that veil of peace, they are going to preparing for war.
Does not have the gumption to call for peace. It does not even recognize a free, independent state of Israel, right from the time of creation of Israel back in 1948. All right. So let me get Gautam Mukherjee. Gautam, a quick short answer, then I go to Vijay Kranti before I wrap up this discussion. So a solution at hand, is it possible when the Arab world, particularly the countries that are neighboring Israel, are at this point of time in belligerence in wake of whatever narratives that are being put out, whether it is an airstrike by Israelis or a misfire by the Hamas? At the end of the day, it's a war of, it's an information warfare. So it is completely the prerogative of what the Arab world wants to believe for its own advantage, that they would like to then take forward the talks or not.
But humanitarian aid is what is going to occupy the media headlines, while Hamas will be rooted out as much as is possible, so that at least the aim is in the next 50 years they can't mount such a thing. The main problem is they've built hundreds of tunnels in which they hide both their weapons and themselves, and it goes from the Gaza Strip into different parts of Israel. This is what the ground action is going to uncover and destroy. In addition to that, they'll kill as many Hamas as possible. But I think the humanitarian aid will go forward.
Okay.
There is nothing to discuss with Hamas in any case.
Right. Absolutely. Vijay Kranti, quickly, a closing comment from you here then. Also, when it comes to the politics of the West, this is extremely advantageous for the right wing here.
Yes. The question is not right wing or left wing. I see the biggest problem now for the democratic world is the so-called leftist movement, which claims to be liberals. They are a kind of Trojan horse of China and communism, and the way they have spread their tentacles across the democratic world, and even people like George Soros are funding them, it is going to be a big problem for the democratic world. The democratic world has less to worry of the Islamist jihadists the democratic world has more to worry about these liberals who have developed more credibility and who appear to be political correct. The one lesson Israel and any country should not forget, that when Hamas was preparing for a huge attack on Israel, it was the left liberals of Israel who had overwhelmed the streets against Netanyahu's law, the new law.
The law reform, yes.
In that garb, the entire security system lost its fulcrum, lost its pivot, and they forgot that there was a bigger problem going on. And this is how the left liberals damage. They have learned this lesson from their, what you call their godfathers, the communists, how to damage a system from within.
Okay.
So I think this is Hamas this attack is the biggest lesson for all democratic countries about the potentials of left liberals in their respective countries. And unless something is done about them, the whole world is going to go, if not Islamist, it's going to go the China way, and another new version of communism we will see very soon.
Absolutely. All right, I'm out of time, but I thank all of you for joining me on the telecast and sharing your views. We'll continue this conversation going. There is no sight of abatement when it comes to the Israeli strikes on Hamas. The war will continue, the attacks, the counter-attacks will continue, and we'll keep a close watch on that. Thanks for watching.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.